Okay, everyone. I don't know how many of you are going to be familiar with the topic that I'm talking about. Actually, I'm pretty sure none of you will be, at least in the details of it. But today's topic is souvenirs from the Holy Land, 19th century souvenirs from the Holy Land, Terra Santa. And the reason that we're doing this topic today, I've been thinking about doing this topic for a while, and that's because it has something to do with Israel. This past Sunday was the Israel Day Parade. That's my connection for doing it now. Relatively random, but there we go. So this is like many of the random walks down Mill Street. This presentation is going to be a show and tell of an item or a group of items from Shearith Israel's archives. I'm going to share my screen so you can see what I'm talking about. And then you will have a better sense of it. Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen? Just making sure you can see my screen. Yes? Okay, good. Terra Santa, 19th century souvenirs from the Holy Land. June 7th, 2023. That's today. The Orange Day in New York, which if you're watching this at some other time and place, today we had smoke from Canada filling the city, but hopefully most of you are inside or at least wearing a mask and will not be affected by the smoke. This presentation has nothing to do with smoke. Okay. This has to do with Terra Santa, which literally means holy earth, holy land, holy earth, which is a term that we use in Shearith Israel and among the Portuguese Jews and Sephardic Jews, maybe even more generally, to refer to the earth, literally the earth from Eretz Israel, that we sprinkle customarily in the casket that a deceased person will be buried in, so that everybody is buried with some of the land of Eretz Israel with them. That is a custom. It's a widespread custom, not just ours. The Ashkenazim do it too. In fact, when you go, if you ever, shouldn't have to do it, but if you ever perform a tahara and you are in a funeral home, there are pre-packaged little bags of Admat Kodesh that you can cut open and sprinkle in, and that is the custom to this day. And so that is, we're going to talk around that Terra Santa, but also, as you may know, objects from the Holy Land are very, souvenirs from trips to the Holy Land are nothing new and can go back a long time. In fact, if you Google Terra Santa, you will get all sorts of Christian travel souvenirs that are sold to this day for people who visit Israel and want to bring back a little bit of earth with them. And so that is what we're going to see. When I first started here at Shamash in 2011, 2012, and the management of the archives came on under my responsibility and my duties, I visited there for the very first time. And one of the things I saw on my very first day that still amazes me to this day, and we're talking about today, is a little box. This is the box. It's about, I don't know, 6 inches long, maybe less, 5 inches, maybe it's 4 by 5, and I don't know how high it is, maybe 3-4 inches high. Not very big, index card size, maybe a little bit larger than an index card. And you can see here, it's like a cardboard box, and it has on it some very old, I don't even know what this is exactly, advertisement, sort of like paper pasted on the outside to reinforce it, I guess. I don't even know what that paper is, but it has nothing to do with tonight's talk, just to show you that the box itself is old. And I opened it up, and inside the box is this, an envelope. Envelope says Jacob L. Satius, Esquire, President. So we're going to talk a little about who he was. And inside the envelope is this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 glass bottles with corks and wax seals, and if you can see it on top here, a wooden case with the mezuzah in it. That actually wasn't in the envelope. The glass jars were in the envelope. This was next to it in that blue box. And if you can see carefully, I'm not sure. We're gonna tell you what it says on each one of these bottles. I don't know how much you can see from your screen at home. The first one is a little larger than the others. It says Admat Kodesh, earth from the Holy Land. So this is little jars, little glass jars of earth from the Holy Land. There's a lot of them, so let's see what they are. This one literally says Admat Kodesh, earth from the Holy Land, with no and without any other explanation. But then the other ones are more specific. This one says Kotel Ma'aravi, Kotel Ma'aravi. And then it says in English, west wall of the temple at Jerusalem. Okay. Then you have one that's just marked sacrificial ashes. Don't know what that means. The next one, there's no particular order. This is just the way I took the picture. So I don't know if there was an order. This is not in it. It says Rachel's tomb, Kever Rachel. Then you have something that says foundation of Solomon's temple. Then you have something that says Jeremiah's tomb. This one says Jesse's tomb, Yishai, father of David. And this one says Zechariah's tomb. And as you can see, for whatever reason, these are different things. This one is brown, this one is gray, this one is white, this one has sort of chunks in it. So somebody sent these back from Israel to New York to share with Israel. And that is the mystery of what we're going to try to solve today, or at least we're going to take a stab at what these are and where they're from and why they're in the archives of Share with Israel. That's our topic today. Somebody sent these, and that is the question. So before we begin, I'm just going to show you sort of what these places look like or looked like back in the 19th century, because this is definitely from the 19th century. So this is a photograph of the Kotel. Looks pretty much the same, more or less, except that it doesn't have all the space that we have now. Had a wall here and very narrow. If you can see this is all the place that Jews can pray, and that's it. That's all, just this little thing. Now you go there, it's a big space, big plaza, but that's not the way it was in the 19th century. Up here on the top right, this is the Zechariah's tomb. This you can visit today. I think they don't say that Zechariah is buried there, but traditionally for a long time, and you'll probably still see it in tourist books, I think they now say that it's a entry to some kever of one of the old Jerusalem families. Anyway, that's in Jerusalem or near Jerusalem. The next one here, it says Jesse's tomb. That's actually Kever Yishai. That I believe is in Hebron, not in Jerusalem at all. Jeremiah's tomb, I think, I mean, is Jeremiah buried there? Is any of these people buried there? I don't know, but that is a place in Jerusalem that's sort of the entrance to a cave. I don't think this kind of view exists anymore, but that's what it looked like in the 19th century. And then when it says foundation of Solomon's temple, I really don't know exactly what that refers to, but I'm guessing that the person who wrote it on visited the Temple Mount and saw went to the Dome of the Rock and saw the foundation stone of the temple. I could be wrong. Maybe it means something else, but that's my suspicion. Then it says Rachel's tomb. That is a kever. That is a tomb that is well known. It's near Beit Lechem, and that actually Moses Montefiore in the 19th century expanded and made visitor worthy. Sacrificial ashes, I have no idea what that could have been or where those could have come from. Maybe he visited the Temple Mount and someone told him that these are the ashes from the Mizbeach. I have no idea. Could also be just is equally plausible some other location that someone showed him a bama or something, or maybe not at all. Maybe it's a Christian thing. I don't know what sacrificial ashes could refer to. And then Kotel Ma'aravi, we know what that means. That means the Kotel. And how what exactly is in here? Did he dig? Did he break off some stone? Did he dig in the ground? I don't know exactly what is in this jar, but whatever it is, it came from the Kotel. So that is what was sent to Sheretz Israel in the middle of the 19th century. How do we know when it's from? That is very difficult. There's no other information. There's no letters about it. There's no, this is my donation. It doesn't say who sent it. Doesn't say anything about it. So that's our mission, to try to figure out a little more about what these are and why they're in Sheretz Israel's archives. So if you recall, they were in an envelope. The envelope was addressed, or at least written, to the recipient, Jacob L. Seixas, Esquire, President. Who was Jacob L. Seixas? He was a grandson of Benjamin Seixas. That makes him a grandnephew of Gershom Mendy Seixas. This is a picture of him here. And he was the Parnas of Sheretz Israel for a very specific 4-year period, from 1858 to 1861. 1858 to 1861. And so my first clue is this envelope. And while it's not proof positive, I highly suspect that this group of items was sent to Jacob Seixas in the period that he was the president of Sheretz Israel, making it dating from 1858 to 1861. Could be proven wrong, but I think that's a fair assumption based on the envelope. The next clue are these wax seals. Now, the one on the left that was bigger, the Admat Kodesh, has some kind of animal on it. But these thinner ones that came from the different locations have initials. And it's a little hard to see, but if you examine them carefully, and each one, some of the letters stand out better than others. This is the clearest one. I don't know if you can see it with me. It says F-A-K. 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 So my working suspicion, and it could be wrong, is that F-A-K, whoever that was, visited Israel in the period between 1858 and 1861 and sent these back to Jacob Seixas, the Parnas of Sheretz Israel. Okay, we're going to take a break from this now. We're going to examine a few other things, and we're going to come back to this at the end. But this is a curious item. I don't know, because I haven't researched it, not that it's not knowable, how rare this kind of thing is. Maybe there's many examples of people sending Admat Kodesh to their hometowns. Maybe museums are filled with these things, but I suspect that maybe it's not so common. I'm not sure. From this era, 1858, 1861, it's pretty early. People didn't travel as much as they do now. They traveled more locally. Travel to Israel would have been a big undertaking. People did it, but not frequently. And so makes me wonder, if I showed this to a museum curator, what they might think. Okay, in Sheretz Israel, I want to tell you about something called the Chebra Trumat HaKodesh. So what you have to imagine for a second is the way funds were raised for the benefit of Israel or communities in Israel in an early period. And that would involve a shliach, an emissary who was sent from a community in Israel to raise funds for their needs all around the world. And that was the traditional way it was done from medieval period until modern period. In fact, some of these emissaries were very, very famous, even in American Jewish history. So if you think of who was the rabbi Karigal, Chaim Karigal in Newport, he was a shliach. He was a person who was sent to raise funds from Israel, and he went all over the world. And he didn't return to Israel. He would just forward things along or whatever. That was his original thing. He was a shliach. He ended up spending a whole lifetime elsewhere, but that's what he was. And there were many others. And the way it worked is the shliach would come to a community, he would state his case, the community would have an appeal usually, raise some funds, give the shliach some funds, the shliach would send funds that he collected back to Israel. Of course, he would also pay off his debts from wherever he was using those funds, and then move on to the next place. Very frequently, after America, in the beginning, there weren't that many. In the 18th century, there weren't that many emissaries to America because America didn't have great wealth, or didn't not nearly as much as, let's say, communities in Italy or London or elsewhere. But as America grew and became more wealthy, emissaries started to travel there. And so you would get frequently emissaries coming to New York, and New York would sometimes they would react well if the person had a good appeal or if they were very, personable. But frequently they would just try to send them off. Go to Charleston, go to Richmond, go to Newport, go to Philadelphia. Don't stay here. Okay, that's what happened frequently. And in 1825, there was somebody who came from Tveria, made an appeal. The synagogue gave generously, but they said, you know what, we're going to send this money, I forgot the name is Yitzhaki, I think. We're going to send the money that that we're raising for Tveria, that you are here for, to London to be forwarded to New York, and bypassed the shliach and sent the shliach on his way elsewhere. This shows you the growing awareness that the shliach system was a little bit inefficient. And so then in 1832, this man came. His name was, well, they say in English, Enoch Zundel, Hanoch Zundel, who was an emissary from Israel, from Jerusalem, who came to America in 1832. Quite a distinguished looking gentleman with a wonderful talit and an Eastern looking hat and a very Ashkenazic name. And he raised money for yeshivot in Israel. And he stayed in New York for a little while. He was considered a Hebrew scholar. He attended to things in America. But at that time, they raised money for him on his behalf, or because of his appeal. But Sheretz Israel had enough. Sheretz Israel had enough. And in the very same year that he came, almost assuredly in response to his coming, they created yichidim of the community, not the community, by its power as a congregation, but individuals from the community created something called Chebra Terumat HaKodesh, which was sole function was to raise money for Israel and to send that money. And the top quote here is from its constitution. The money raised by this society shall be remitted at stated times to a responsible agent in Europe or Asia, to be distributed by him fairly and equitably among the different congregations in the Holy Land, but in no instance whatever to be paid to any messenger or agent of the congregations who there may be sent to. They're really trying to end this shliach thing. We'll send you money, but don't send us these mishulachim. Don't send them here. We don't want them. We'll send you money. We'll have an organization for it, and we're not going to support these shlichim anymore. And so that was the way that the congregation here in New York tried to deal with the problem. What was the problem exactly? Somebody like this, in particular, this man lived lavishly and had lots of debts and no way to pay for them. And the congregation had to pay his rent, his food, his travel expenses, all of it falling on the shoulders of Sheretz Israel, and they just had enough. They were not doing this anymore. Anyway, one day we'll talk about this fellow, Hanoch Zundel. He's a very interesting character. But the reason I'm mentioning it here today is what here from Dr. Poole's book. Rabbi Enoch Zundel, whose arrival touched off this constructive countermeasure to the costly system of shlichut, remained in New York for some time. During 1832 and in 1833, he not infrequently needed immediate relief. This was granted him. In return, he gave to the congregation through Chazan Seishis 2 pounds of Terra Santa, sacred soil from the Holy Land, to be sprinkled on the dead prior to burial as a symbolic identification with the sanctified dust of the promised land. So he gave Terra Santa to the congregation as, I guess, his way of repaying, or what could he offer? That's one of the things he gave to the congregation, and the congregation used it. The Chebra used it in preparing deceased for burial. And this is a very interesting thing that Dr. Poole has a little aside after that. 20 years later, Uriah Phillips Levy, who was a Commodore in the United States Navy, replenished the precious supply when the naval vessel he commanded went to the Mediterranean. He brought back a wagon load of soil of the Holy Land, which Terra Santa is still drawn from. So I went for in the congregation to this day. That's being written in 1955. I have no idea here in 2023 what this supply of Terra Santa was, but it lasted from 1850 or so to 1955 at least. And I kind of wish that there was any kind of picture of it or anything or whatever, a box or bottle or whatever. It's not this. It's not the bottles that I showed you beforehand. It's a much, much greater amount. But I have no one to ask anymore, alas. My grandfather is long gone, and I don't know who the last person who would have dealt with that Terra Santa would have been. But that's what Dr. Poole writes. So this is Terra Santa. This is Terra Santa for congregational use. Is that the same as the Terra Santa that was sent to in 1858? I tend to doubt it, but I don't know. Was that the intention of why it was sent to the congregation? Probably not, but maybe. Anyway, that is some earlier examples of people bringing back earth to New York from Israel. And now let's take a look at another member of the Kershit family. Now we're going to tell you the story about Judah Turo, Gershom Kershit, and Moses Montefiore and Mishkanot Shananim, the colony in Israel, the almshouses in Israel that Judah Turo built. So Judah Turo, as you probably are aware, was a fabulously wealthy man who was born in Newport, Rhode Island during the Revolution. His father, who was the Chazan in Newport, not a businessman of any sort, fled Newport, went to New York, and then when the revolution started turning down the wrong way for the British, he fled to, I think, Jamaica, or maybe, I don't know, one of the islands in the Caribbean. I'm going to say Jamaica, I could be wrong. And that's where he died. And he died with a wife and two little children, Judah and Abraham Turo. The wife was the sister of a man named Moses Michael Hayes, who was a merchant in Boston. So she, after Isaac Turo dies, takes her two little kids, moves to the house of her brother in Boston, and he raises them. He supports them and he raises them into his business, and they become fabulously wealthy, both Abraham Turo and Judah Turo. Abraham Turo dies young. Both of them die unmarried. Abraham Turo dies young, and in his will, he leaves money for every synagogue at that time in America, including Shearith Israel and others. And Judah Turo lives longer, also as a bachelor. And he, through whatever course of his life, ends up living in New Orleans in the 1840s. And that's where Judah Turo lives. Gershom Kershit goes to New Orleans from Richmond, Virginia. By the way, who is Gershom Kershit? He's the son of Israel Ber Kershit, the man who was deeply involved with Chebrat Trumat HaKodesh, who we have spoken about before, who was probably the most learned Jew in America in the early part of the 19th century. He came from Germany. He married Gershom Mendes Seixas' daughter, and he was served as president of Shearith Israel. He also moved to Richmond, and he came back from Richmond. He made his way around. So his son, who was born in Richmond, was Gershom Kershit. Gershom Kershit, when he becomes a young man in his 20s or 30s, moves to New Orleans to engage in business. He's relatively successful. It's not Judah Turo, but he's a successful businessman in New Orleans. And Gershom Kershit cannot stand the Jewish community in New Orleans. There's a rabbi there who he absolutely hates, thinks he's a complete charlatan, doesn't know any Judaism, is just teaching from the Christian Bible, essentially. And he deigns to do something about it. And he speaks to Judah Turo and other members of the New Orleans community, and he starts a synagogue. Judah Turo agrees, and they call the synagogue Nifutzot Yehuda, the dispersed of Judah, after Judah Turo. And it is said that Judah Turo was so moved by Gershom Kershit and the opening of this synagogue, to which Kershit was the president and the chazan and everything, that he became Baal Teshuvah, that he returned to Judaism in his later life. He had strayed far, that he returned to Judaism later in life. Whether that's true or not in a observant way, I don't know, but it's certainly true in a philanthropic way. Kershit seemed to have some kind of influence on Turo for the betterment of Jewish life in New Orleans and in America and in the world. And when Judah Turo dies, I think in 1854, he leaves a fabulously enormous will where he leaves money to lots of charitable things. And the executor of that will is Gershom Kershit. So Gershom Kershit is the executor of the will. Now, one of the major beneficiaries of his will, not the only one, but I think probably the largest, is the land of Israel. To be administered, I think it was like $60,000 of 1854 money, which is an enormous sum, to be administered by Moses Montefiore. And that donation is the cause for a trip that Kershit and Montefiore make in 1854 to make a hospital in Jerusalem. So Kershit and Montefiore go in 1854, 1855 to Jerusalem. They have a long trip ahead of them. They get to Jerusalem, and Montefiore has been there before. He's been philanthropic before. They know him there. And the rabbis or the other beneficiaries of Montefiore's charitable endeavors in the past say, you know what? The Rothschilds they just made a hospital. We don't need a second hospital for Jewish people in Jerusalem. We could use housing for people here and people who can't support themselves and people who can't buy property. We need a place for the poor to live, an almshouse. And they convinced Kershit and Montefiore that would be a better thing to do. And so that's what happens. So first they try to build a hospital, and later on that hospital gets converted into an almshouse, which is known to this day as Mishkanot Shananim. You know, and if you go to Israel and you go to Jerusalem and you see the windmill and everyone talks about Moses Montefiore, really that's Judah Turo's money that built that whole area. That was Judah Turo's contribution to the building of Jerusalem. Now, why am I spending so much time on this? That's because of another item for show and tell in Sheretz Israel's archives, which are papers between correspondence between Gershom Kershit, and Moses Montefiore. And there are letters back and forth between them, and many of those letters are in Sheretz Israel's archives. One of them, did I not put oh no. Okay, well, we'll have to see the transcript. There is a 4-page letter written in 1855 on this trip that Kershit takes with Montefiore to Jerusalem after the death of Judah Turo to begin a hospital in Jerusalem. Kershit goes and he writes a long letter back to his family. And I want to read this letter to you because it is so chock full of personal, he's not writing for posterity, he's writing to his family. So let's read it together, shall we? My dear sisters and brothers, this is written in Alexandria, Egypt, September 3rd, 1855. My dear sisters and brothers, these are the Kershit family, their husbands, wives, and offspring, and mommy. I wrote you from Jerusalem, from which city we departed as I expected. But instead of going direct to Jaffa, we went first to Hebron, where we passed a few days and where I saw everything of interest that could be seen. After 7 hours hard horseback riding, I arrived at Hebron, and next day I took a guide and went to Abraham's tree. I don't know where Abraham's tree is or if that's still a site. I have no idea, but in 1855, that was a tourist site. It was a ride of an hour outside of Hebron. On reaching the tree, I found that the Prussian consul, who had pitched a tent near to it, was entertaining under the tree the Pasha of Jerusalem and the English consul and his sister. So he gets there, and quite randomly, there are all sorts of other politicos in or near an hour away from Hebron. I therefore stopped at a distance to view the tree, intending to revisit that the next day. I don't want to bother these fancy people. I'll just stay here and take a look at the tree. I'll come back another day. But as I knew the Pasha, and he recognized me, the Prussian and English consuls came out to me and insisted on my joining them, which I did in coffee and the pipe. These are the things that that make this letter so great. He didn't just meet with them; he had coffee with them. He smoked with them. Okay. On visiting the old synagogue in Hebron, I lighted 2 lamps and made hashkabot for our dear departed parents in heaven. So that's another thing. He made Gershom Kershit made hashkabot for his deceased relatives in Hebron. Marat Machpelah, presumably. Okay. The remains of the patriarchs I approached as near as I could. To have entered the cave of Machpelah might have produced great mischief to my companions. Oh, so he tells you he didn't do it. Great mischief. So I guess there were problems with the locals back then as well. The grave of Jesse I visited by candlelight. We saw that earlier. Great troubles had just ended between the government troops, this is the Ottoman Empire, and the savages near Hebron, and all the forces available had been sent from Jerusalem. So there were problems in Hebron at the time in 1855. The Pasha, at the head of 500 soldiers, was in momentary dread of a new outbreak. Still, if it had not been just at the time of one of the Turkish festivals, when fanaticism runs highest, the Pasha would have taken us into the cave of Machpelah, even as he took us through and through the Mosque of Omar. So earlier, when he had been in Jerusalem, the Pasha of Jerusalem took him to the Mosque of Omar. But here in Hebron, because it was a holiday time for, I don't know if it's a Muslim holiday or a Turkish holiday of some kind, they did not go into Marat Machpelah. Patience, better luck next time. Okay, let's see what this comment is here. Yes. We'll talk about Mishkanot Shananim, but yeah, this is exactly right. This is exactly what people should know but don't know. Okay, thank you, Maimon. So after 9 hours horseback ride from Hebron to Jaffa, that's a long trip on horse. We rested 3 hours in Ramla in the middle of the day. Sir M.M., that is Moses Montefiore, bought a garden at Jaffa. He bought a garden at Jaffa. Such pomegranates, citrons, mulberries, oranges, and the like. That's where they. Okay, that's what it said. We left Jaffa and arrived here 2 days ago. Now he's in Alexandria, Egypt, and now await the arrival of the India passengers and mails at Suez. When we still proceed a couple of days to Malta and Marseille. We expect to be in Marseille before the new year, which festival will please God keep there, and then go to London in time for Yom Kippur. I may stop in Paris or may go on to London after Kippur, and after Kippur return to Paris, and then to, I don't know where that is, La Chapelle. On our arrival here in Alexandria, the Viceroy of Egypt said, Said Pasha, sent his barges to bring us and our luggage from the steamer, and now your humble brother is occupying the quarters of the prince, or rather king, of Egypt, at what is called the Ambrosia Villa, where, of course, everything is done up in royal style. This is writing to his family, how fancy it is there. Must be a big difference from what he was just happening in Israel. I do not know how many servants there are, perhaps 30. I have little to say to any, excepting at meal times and before and after meals, to one whose sole duty it is to attend to the pipes, and to another to furnish the coffee, and such coffee, all day and night. So he's fascinated that there are servants who are just for the smoke and just for the coffee. By the way, that's the second time he's mentioned pipes and coffee. Okay. And I presume it's a water pipe, like you see in the Arab areas of Israel today. Let's see. Yeah. I'm glad that people are commenting. It means that you're as fascinated by this letter as I was. I am to be presented to His Highness tomorrow. His Premier's First Lord of the Treasury visited us yesterday, and on being introduced said that His Highness had spoken about me to him. Sir Moses Montefiore has visited him already. They all speak French, and so I got along very well. Mr. Edwin de Leon, our consul, that is the American consul who we can talk about another time, called on me and said he knew our Alexander 8 years ago. That's Alexander Kershey. So the consul to, I don't know if it's Egypt or Israel, I have to check the story of Edwin de Leon, knows the Kershey family from America and came to visit Gershom Kershey while he's in Alexandria. Sir Moses Montefiore was pleased to find an Israelite representing the United States here. The British, the great Sir Moses was happy to see that a Jewish American consul in Alexandria. De Leon left here yesterday for Constantinople, was very sorry I came just when he had to go. He sent me Washington and New York papers and a copy of his dispatches to Washington relative to the Greeks here. So he's now passing along letters. He's become a little bit of a diplomat, sending letters back to America from the Middle East about the Greeks. This morning I found on my dressing table new hairbrushes, finger and toothbrushes, clothes brushes, and eau de cologne, soaps, etc. So they have outfitted him. We have 2 elegant carriages and a dozen horses at our command, and indeed everything that can be thought of. I wanted to go to Cairo, Memphis, and the pyramids, but to have done so might have endangered my being back in time to go with my friends to Europe. Besides, I am so delightfully situated, so cool and invigorating an atmosphere I am in, that I feared a change of climate. And again, if I went, I should be deprived of privileges with the viceroy, which hereafter may be of consequence to me and our nation. So that is an interesting thing that he says. He says, I wanted to go sightseeing to see the pyramids, but it's really nice where I am. And I'm making a relationship with the viceroy of Egypt, and that could be good for the Jewish people. And so I'm going to stay here, not go sightseeing. Okay. The pyramids have stood so long as to warrant the belief that they will yet stand for some years, and it is not improbable that I should please God come this way again. I'll see them on my next trip, he says. I have at all events seen Pompeii's pillar, Cleopatra's needles here in the neighborhood of Alexandria. The abundance of palm trees and other tropical productions, fruits, etc., is beyond description, unless one thinks of Cuba. The Jews here are making great preparations at the synagogue to receive Sir Moses Montefiore in style. I suppose tomorrow or the next day, the grand reception will take place. A deputation waited on him this morning when the usual ceremonies took place. The garden around the premises, this is the synagogue in which this is in the premises in which we are staying, so it's the palace, reminds me of some of the most celebrated grounds I have seen in Europe. Of course, everything is on a scale of magnificence such as only is known to royalty. Many of the consuls and conspicuous citizens here have paid their visits. I feel quite like a nobleman myself now, although I am not the less wedded to republican institutions. So I like that. He's telling his family that how great it is to be treated like a royal, but I'm still American. I know, not great to be a royal. And then he finishes off that our new year may be one of health and peace and contentment to all dear us and to each of us is fervent prayer of yours ever the same Gershom. And then he has a little PS, which in the original, I thought I had put it in there, but the original, it's written around the edge, like you would write an airmail letter, and use up every single space on the page. So he finishes, signs Gershom on the very, very bottom, and then all around the edge is his PS. And it's 4 pages of edge. Regards to Reverend Isaacs, that's in New York, Reverend Lyons, that's J.J. Lyons, Raphael Leeser, Abbey Hart. So these are all the famous rabbis of New York of the day. Reverend Isaacs is B'nai Jeshurun, Reverend Lyons is Sheretz Israel. Reverend Isaacs is Shari Tefillah, Reverend Lyons is Sheretz Israel, Reverend Raphael is B'nai Jeshurun, Isaac Leeser is Mikveh Israel in Philadelphia. I don't know who Abbey Hart is, but he promised to tell of my travels. This letter will go with me to Marseille, but I write today because I have an hour to spare. Sir Moses Montefiore and Lady Montefiore desired me to express their Respects and good wishes to my brothers and sisters. My late fair Amanuensis desires to be remembered. My love to the little woman. I don't know who that is. Duty. I don't know who that is. Uncle Theo, Aunt Selena, Uncle David, Gutheim, and Crankor. This is such a marvelous letter. I don't know who knows about this letter, but it is an absolutely marvelous letter that's written to Gershom Kershit in 1855. So now we'll come back to the original reason that we have this talk today. Gershom Kershit. Let's see where he is here. Gershom Kershit is the son of Israel bar Kershit, and he's the one who befriends Moses Montefiore. He's the executive of Judah Turo's estate, and he took this amazing trip in 1855. He goes back again in 1857. I don't have a letter of him then, but it's a well-known trip. That's actually when Mishkanot Shananim gets built or completed. In 1855, they're going to Israel. They try to build a hospital and are told that they don't need a hospital. He dies. Kershit dies in 1863, so just a few years later. He had married Grace Gedalia, no relation of mine, who was a relative of Moses Montefiore, without children. And so levirate marriage actually takes place, and Alexander Kershit, the brother of Gershon, who was a widower himself, marries Grace Gedalia. I don't think they have any children, unfortunately, but that is what happens. So Gershom Kershit dies, his brother marries her, and that is the story of Gershom Kershit. Now, who is F.A.K.? I have no way to prove it, but I am quite convinced that F.A.K. is young Frederick Adolf Kershit, F.A.K., who was a nephew of Gershom Kershit and of Alexander Kershit, and who may have traveled with them on their trip in 1857 when he was a teenager. It's also possible that those vials that were something that he sent with Gershom or Alexander on one of their trips to come back with for him. So maybe the teenager didn't go himself. Maybe he sent his relatives to do it for him. But I don't have any better way to prove it. But how many people traveled from New York to Israel? Not that many. How many people would have visited all those places and sent back to the synagogue? Not that many. And who would have sent it to Jacob Satius? And F.A.K., I have a feeling, is Frederick Adolf Kershit. So that is my presentation for you today. And the last thing is, this is a building that was built by Frederick Kershit, or Asher Kershit, his father. They were in the textile business in the late 19th century in New York. And this building was built for their business, where they manufactured laces and other kinds of textiles. They were a pretty big manufacturer. This building still exists. It is on 19th Street, not far from where the synagogue was. So it's called the Kershit Building. You can Google it if you want. The Kershit Building, you'll get a picture of it here. This part has been redone over time, but this is the original look of it. So that is our story. It all came from this little box of Terra Santa. Hope you liked it. I'm gonna, there it is. Well, no, it went too far. One more. All right, I don't know what's happening here. So let me stop the share and let you guys speak and ask questions. Okay, so that is the story. So as Maimon told us earlier, Mishkanot Shananim is to this day a place where you can go and visit and stay. And they don't give a lot of credit to the real origin of its building, which was Judah Turo and Gershom Kershit. There is, I haven't seen it, there is a little plaque apparently to Judah Turo, but everyone associates it with Montefiore. Okay, Anyone else know the story of Kershit? And yes, Roger.
I don't know the story of Kershit. I just wanted to tell people that if you go to Israel now, in the Eretz Israel Museum in Tel Aviv, there's a very nice exhibit of exactly those trips of Montefiore and his group, and you can actually see some of these photos from the time and from their visits to the places listed in the letter.
Oh, now I have to redo this whole presentation.
No, you don't have to. The other thing that is interesting, you said the letter is dated 1855. That would be before the Suez Canal was opened. It was opened in 69. So if this is indeed from 55, then when he is referencing Suez and the ship coming from India, it is not clear to me that, I mean, there is no Suez Canal, but they must have crossed over land to link to the Suez to continue the trip, which might explain partly the long delay. And the last piece, in 1855, the Ottoman Empire instigates a huge reshuffling of land ownership, land registry, money, and so on. And that is partly the reason for the unrest around the Hebron area.
Huh.
I've actually read a PhD thesis by an NYU student who tracked land ownership in the Hebron area during those decades, and there was a lot of upheaval. Much of the land was unclear in terms of its ownership, and there were a large number of Muslim charities that say that they own land. So this is apparently what they are referring to here as well. So it's
Thank you, Roger. That was really a nice addition to this.
It's quite
class,
interesting
this
structure here.
presentation.
You kept saying that the vials were sent to New York. The envelope that you showed looks as if the vials were inside the envelope, but the envelope has no marks of any kind.
So I think they can't. I don't think they were sent in the mail.
Yeah, exactly. That was going to say. It must have been
There's
sent.
no postage on that envelope.
Yeah, in someone's pocket, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And the one thing I have not examined is that in together with it, so clearly there's some grouping, is that mezuzah. And I suspect, because I read other memoirs of people who traveled in that time, that because it was a long trip, especially just being on the boat for a long time, people took a mezuzah and they affixed it to their quarters wherever they went with them. So there's a famous story of Uriah Phillips Levy, who was the Commodore Levy, who went as a young boy, like really young, like 9 or 10 years old or something like that, and apprenticed on a ship from Philadelphia. And he comes back for his bar mitzvah. But he writes somewhere in his memoir that the only thing he took with him was a mezuzah.
Well, the other possibility, and that one can do that if one looks at the mezuzah, if it is olive wood.
Exactly. So the other thought I had was that it's not from the trip, but it's a souvenir also, or
souvenir, exactly.
There's a sofer in Israel. I'm going to buy a mezuzah. People do that today still. So.
Well, you had mentioned at one point that one can tell by the style of the writing whether it is Ashkenazi or Sephardi or Mizrahi. So maybe if one can look at the scroll.
Well, that won't help you in this case because there are Ashkenazim in Jerusalem.
No, I know, but at least you would know what the origin is and who he would have interacted with or bought the mezuzah from.
Right.
It would not give you any sense of more than that, but at least where the mezuzah may come from. But it may be worth looking at the wood to see whether it's olive wood.
All of this is good.
Yeah, beautiful work, very good. Two questions, please. One is Nefusat Yehuda. At that time, it was following our tradition, Spanish Portuguese, right?
Correct.
Just confirm it, yeah. But now I think it was a reform place or something like that.
I think it has merged with other things. It's totally reformed. Yeah.
And I think during Katrina, it was the only one that everybody went gathered there or something like that.
But I did have a number of years ago, I just realized now that I'm still recording. Let me end the recording here. I did have a number of years ago